and welcome to Nonprofit Podcast. My name is David Higgins. I am so glad you're here listening to us today. I am so thrilled with who my guest is and who I get to speak to today in this whole conversation. You know, we talk a lot about fundraising, marketing, outreach, but it comes with a responsibility to really do it ethically in a manner that builds our nonprofit reputation and doesn't tarnish it. So I've called this particular podcast episode A Nonprofit's Ethical Responsibility with Digital Marketing. And I hope you hang out because what we're going to talk about actually could be a real game saver for you as a nonprofit leader, because we like to just throw ourselves at things and don't think all the details through. We're going to talk about some of the details in this podcast. This episode is brought to us by the book Demystifying Fundraising Funnels. It is a digital marketing blueprint to fund your nonprofit. And have you ever been in that situation where you're like, David, we're stuck right now. We've got these tactile fundraising that we're doing, and we're needing them to grow because right now in this climate, the last 2 years has been pretty brutal. Well, what this book does is shows you how to accent what you already have going and to launch new ideas and fresh ideas using online tools. And it will allow you to thrive versus just survive. We have seen across the board over the last 2 years, nonprofits, no matter how small they are, if they have even the smallest bit of momentum, if they shifted to online, they're moving into actually double-digit financial growth year over year if they're doing a well-balanced plan. So this book is to help you along that journey. So please check it out. You can pick it up at Amazon, Audible, ebooks, wherever books are sold. And let us know any thoughts, questions you have. We love talking about what's inside those covers of those books. So you have a great time reading that. And let's get back to our subject. So what is a nonprofit's ethical responsibility with digital marketing? Our guest today has helped 2 generations of nonprofits and business leaders define this question, from lecturing at Georgetown University to speaking at conferences, battling in Washington, D.C., and speaking today to you and to me. As the SVP in Digital and Marketing Division of the Association of National Advertisers, which we all know as ANA, her law degree is continually put to use. Let's welcome Senny Boone to the Nonprofit Podcast. Senny, it is so good to have you with us.
I'm so glad to be here, David, and so thrilled to share what I can to help edify your audiences.
You know, you have a really unique niche that you are an expert at, and it's one that a lot of us kind of like to forget exists, but it's detrimentally important.
It really is. And I know just dealing with the area of ethics, responsibility, and the law, most people don't think about it until they really need it. So I've certainly seen a lot, and you can almost make it a little bit more exciting by looking at some examples from the past and just making sure that you don't get into that sort of hot water. So that's how I try to approach it. And certainly putting in some visuals and some examples always helps, because I do realize it is dry subject matter.
Absolutely. Well, you know, talk about not dry subject matter. You have a love for dance, art, and music. Have you ever kind of like hobbied in that area or performed in any of these?
Oh, yeah, great question. Actually, since I was a very little one, I've been doing ballet.
Oh,
So
really?
that's really my side passion, is to do classical ballet. So I continue to do ballet every day. I did do a little bit when I was a bit younger, had a little more time to do some ballet. And then also, certainly in undergrad, when I was in college, there was a whole dance program, and there were lots of very interesting roles to play there. So I continue to do it. It's just a source of joy. And of course, that also involves the art and the music aspect of ballet and dance, because, you know, there's beautiful music, and then the artistry of choreography and a lot of the folks out there doing it. So I'm part of that tribe of dancers that continue to keep it up despite, you know, doing everything by Zoom. So yes, it's something I very much enjoy and continue to do.
Wow. You might find this as a shock, but I've had 4 ballet lessons in my life. I
Oh,
was, I got to go all the way back to high school though. My junior year in high
oh,
school, my football coach, his name was Eddie Celestine. I was a wide receiver and a tight end, and he goes, David, you need more finesse. And so he went and spoke to a group of people that were in the ballet community, including there's a girl, Donna, who went to my school, and they brought me in for 4 lessons. I, I don't have light feet, to be honest with you.
well, I understand that, but the football, the athletes are great for ballet because they can lift the dancers. So please, if you're out there, if you're doing football, if you're doing sports, and you want to meet a lot of different individuals, a lot of ballet folks, please come and help us because we need a lot of that strength.
Well, certainly wonderful people. To this day, Donna is a friend of ours. Her and her family live down in Arizona and Facebook friends with us. We talk often. So yeah, lifetime friends born out of ballet. So who knew?
Who knew? Yeah.
I graduated high school in 1988, and you were starting to pursue your law degree the same year. Did you ever imagine that it would become a nonprofit focused attorney in those years?
Never. My undergrad was in journalism, and I really wanted to go out and fight the good fight for the First Amendment, to make sure it protect folks like you now today doing podcasts, your voice, your ability to speak, the freedoms, individual protections for free speech. So I went to Catholic University for law school because they have a communications law institute, which really focused in on uh, all of the practice areas at that time dealing with First Amendment, dealing with new technologies. But I'll tell you, David, back then, our new technology was Ma Bell being broken up in the 1980s. We had the fax machine as whoa, gosh, fax machines. That is
It's
such
a
a
way
new
bit
tech
different
back
now.
then. And today, things are just advancing so quickly. It's so exciting, but a lot of the same principles still apply. So that's really where it drove me is really trying to protect freedoms, the freedom of expression, because the best defense against misinformation is to allow people to converse and speak freely and have disagreements. So we were looking out for that years ago, and then I went to work for newspapers. I also worked at the Ukrainian National Association, so I realized that there's a lot going on with Ukraine. So
Yes.
that's another thing. I'm Ukrainian by descent, so I'm definitely kind of a freedom fighter from the start, and I went to law school for that purpose. And then who knew that there was this incredible nonprofit community that does so much of this great work today? So that's really kind of the path that I was on was really trying to protect these essential freedoms, which I know that the nonprofit community is very active in right now.
I have a love for Ukraine. I actually didn't know that about you, but
Mhm.
we back 30 years ago, I was introduced to Jim and Sandy McCann, who went from Newport across to Ukraine when the wall came down and ended up raising up homes for children that were being trying to be trafficked out of the country for sex slavery in Turkey. And they had some expats that go and they'd rescue these children. These children no longer had families or homes; they're sold by their families as a rule into this horrible situation, and so they'd adopt them. So, and if you go to to Ukraine, you'll probably find a good several hundred McCanns, which is not a very big Ukrainian name. So they stick out
Mhm.
quite a bit, all in the Lviv area. But a wonderful group of people. I've got to travel over there 3 times, teaching music,
Oh,
taking music teachers with us and instruments, and leave them in these homes with all these kids, and then become adults. And then I find them finding me on social media and saying, "Hello, do you remember me?" It's so wonderful.
it's
As a lawyer with fundraising and marketing, best practice focuses in both those areas. Which one seems to pull your attention the most, the marketing side or the fundraising side?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think right now it's a bit of a blend. We've got organizations where the marketing and fundraising teams are siloed. So there are rules that impact both areas. Others wear both hats, as you can imagine, nonprofits that don't have as many resources. I say the one area that's really adding to my plate right now is just the area of privacy and donor relations. So that is a huge area to try to protect, your contact lists, your donors, your supporters, and doing that in a privacy compliant manner is more and more challenging as the technologies change. And as we have much deeper data needs as nonprofit organizations, gone are the days where you can just solely rely on a name and address. Now we have so many different components that we can utilize to reach someone and to get them to donate and to support the organization. So I would say privacy is probably the number one issue. It's complex, it's challenging, and it's not being alleviated right now. States are going crazy with more and more privacy regulations.
Yeah, I want to dive into this a whole lot deeper here in about two questions, but I want to sidestep and just ask you one other small question. You and the ANA team were on Capitol Hill in 2019, reminding lawmakers we need national data privacy law to protect the interests of consumers, donors, marketers, fundraisers, us as nonprofits. Uh, Again, just last year, you were engaged, your team was engaged at the US Supreme Court, from what I understand. Is that right?
Yes, yes, we filed an amicus brief um, in a case that involves protecting donor privacy. So it's not necessarily around the data privacy issue in the sense of the privacy in terms of the California consumer protections. This has to do more with um, basically outing large donors that might donate to charities and protecting their privacy, because a lot of organizations are very concerned that this might chill donations. So we went in with an amicus brief to try to protect their privacy, because we felt that California had many other options to go and locate, who are these donors if there's a cause for concern for an organization and their larger donors. But California really wanted to go in there and force a requirement that we felt was too heavy-handed. So we wanted to make sure that we filed in the court, and thankfully they did, rule in our favor against the California attorney general that wanted to go after and expose the donors to various organizations. We were afraid of what that might do to the donors that really they were giving. They were not expecting to be like outed and put forth in the public domain, but they were trying to support organizations that they felt strongly about. So that's another facet of the work that we do is to try to protect donor privacy. The
Mhm.
other the other aspect of privacy has to do with data and protecting the data that you as a nonprofit might be collecting, storing, sharing, and the like. And I'd be happy to talk more about that.
Yep, absolutely. We had a nonprofit that I was running in San Diego for a season.
Mm.
We had a number of people that gave large amounts every year. And I remember having a couple of them walk into my office saying, David, we don't want anyone to know that we're giving, because we don't want everyone showing up at our door, sending us latest emails, coming to our offices asking us for money. We want to keep it private because we don't want any of our time stolen from us by people with their hand out. And they had their reasons, and they were good reasons. And so I'm really glad you were successful in that attempt. How did this become such a mission for you, this area of privacy issues?
Well, originally privacy, I would say, was like a third or fourth issue. I mean, it's always been one of our legislative concerns. Privacy bills have been introduced in Congress and in the states for decades. I mean, you'd be surprised to know how many over time. It's hundreds and hundreds of legislative proposals. It's sort of a hot button issue that gets a lot of pro and con support. But with the digital landscape and the ecosystem that we're in now, it's really heated up, especially with the very, very large tech companies like Google and Facebook, and concerns about what might be happening with data behind the scenes. So, as much as nonprofits, when we were talking about data privacy years ago, it was much more simple. What do you do with the name and address? How do you handle this? What is data stewardship? Now, data has really shifted into the digital realm So just imagine all of the digital channels. They all throw off data that can be very helpful for a nonprofit that is seeking to acquire new donors or new supporters, or they might have information for these individuals, not necessarily to raise money, but perhaps there might be a situation where they're trying to reach out on the basis of a disease that they're trying to eradicate and trying to learn more about who's impacted, let's say diabetes or cancer. Such a need to go out with positive messages, with giving individuals information about screening and testing for these things. Or, of course, during the pandemic and what was happening to get people the right information. So, there's a lot of reasons that nonprofits need the data. It's not necessarily just to outreach to seek donations, but it's also informational and to provide them key information about, the human needs that are underway right now.
Can you help me understand some of the data and privacy trends that are really starting to move, that are going to really affect nonprofits in this next year or two?
Yeah, I would say there's two. One is dealing with changes to privacy standards by the large tech companies. So, for example, Apple, I mean, many of you, you're probably maybe looking at this on an Apple device. They made some changes to email. And for nonprofits, they do often utilize email addresses to outreach. And the way that the analytics are now established by Apple, Apple really wanted to get in between the donor and the charity with new privacy, what they call, safeguards. But for us as nonprofits, it changes the types of analytics that we can gather around email marketing. So that is one to take a look at. I'm certain many of your audience members have taken a look at this already. But what's happening with Apple and with email marketing is something to really pay close attention to, because you'll probably have to do some different measurements, and you also have to build a tighter relationship, as if it's not hard enough these days, with your donors in a different way so that they open your emails. You're not going to necessarily take the open rate as that analytic. You're going to have to make sure that you have a lot closer tie to that nonprofit donor than even before. It can't just be email. You might have to do a lot of omni-channel marketing. The other one, of course, is what's happening with the cookie-based data gathering. The cookie might be going by the way of the dodo bird, based on changes that Google is making, the rejection of cookie-based models, and looking at newer digital identifiers. So not so much on the nonprofit side, but the third parties, the data transactions are changing a little bit. So there's different identifiers that might be used to do things like retargeting and other digital marketing practices. So keeping an eye on that is incredibly important, so that you're not just relying on cookies to track your data. So those are two: cookieless future and the email marketing.
That's going to make a big adjustment to a lot of people's data gathering. I'm going to dumb this down just a little bit. Um, if I go back, just a decade and a half, and I was running a performing arts center, and I was a director of the Performing Arts Center, and I had a number of churches that were very involved with what we're doing. They bring their youth in and that type of thing. When we had this time, we're going to do a big email campaign, so they all just brought us their email lists, and we emailed to all of their congregations and all of their youth programs and that type of thing, and we just sent it out there, and we got some responses. And we really can't do that anymore, can we?
It depends. So, right now in the US, we have CAN spam. So the CAN spam rules for email marketing apply to for-profit organizations. Nonprofits do get swept in at the state level, so we always tell nonprofits to, follow CAN spam, and that's really an opt-out system. So if you have US residents, you have their email addresses, you want to outreach to them, you can contact them and they can opt out of future messaging. You've probably seen this. You've gotten an email message, and at the bottom, obviously, there's a way to unsubscribe.
Unsubscribe. Yeah.
So you want to follow that process. Now, if you start targeting individuals that are outside of the US, then of course that brings in the international legal considerations. So, for example, you've got the GDPR, which under GDPR, privacy is more of a fundamental human right. So, if you're outreaching, that's likely to be an opt in where you want to get permission in advance. Now, that's really difficult because how do you raise your profile? How do individuals know about you if you have to go out to get permission to tell them about you? I always thought that was kind of a strange scenario, especially for nonprofits, where you really have to get out there and talk about difficult issues. There might be issues that are very sensitive that people don't want to hear about. They don't necessarily want to hear about poverty or disasters or diseases. I mean, that's a sad truth. They'd rather hear about, see the kitten video, and they may not want to see some of this difficult work that nonprofits are doing. So having an opt-in only system for charities seems quite weird and inhumane to me, frankly.
Mm.
So I think that we need to follow the opt-out rule where we have that ability to outreach even with difficult messages, because that's the nature of our humanity. Humanity needs to know about the needs facing nonprofits and the great work that you're doing.
There's a conversation I was just having last week with a nonprofit over in the Puget Sound area. They
Mm.
are one of the leading sexual assault nonprofits that help bring people back into the world after they've been so
Wow.
horribly
Mm.
hurt. And my heart goes out to them. They're trying to find a way to bring awareness to a subject that, like you said, is difficult for people to hear. And so we're looking at a big email campaign, but then it's a matter of they can get the email list of everybody in the region, but can they send it to them legally? So what I hear you saying is if they have an unsubscribe on that email, they can still send that email out. Is that correct?
Again, it depends on the locality.
Okay.
If
We'd
it's
have
in
to
the
look at Washington State then.
US, right? US residents,
Hmm.
certainly, we're under canned spam, so you could likely send that out, and it's a good thing to send that out to inform people. If they opt out, you wanna follow the canned spam rules, and there's a really
Yeah.
good webpage, ftc.gov, ftc.gov. It has some very simple information about do's and don'ts for email marketing. So certainly that is something to take a look at. Now, again, the FTC does not have regulatory jurisdiction necessarily over nonprofits, but if you're using a third party, perhaps. So there are some factors to take a look at from the legal perspective. But with this type of situation, where you're trying to outreach to people that could be helped, certainly with this type of issue, recovering, learning what happened, learning how not to be in that situation is a public interest and it really needs to get out there. It's not necessarily, and also one thing to remember is it's not necessarily a commercial message. There's a lot of messages that are out there that are informational that don't fall in under canned spam. So if you're putting out, let's say, a political message, or you're putting out information about sexual assault, that's not necessarily going to even fall in as a commercial marketing message. Unless, of course, you're selling something or promoting something. So, you know, as a lawyer, I have to say it depends. But, you
I
wanna
understand.
favor, the fact that you're trying to get the information out that is in the public interest and that is so vitally important to potential future victims to know about this or those that wanna support recovery. It's incredibly important. So, again, without seeing your email, if you wanna
Mm.
follow best practices, I would say go over to the ftc.gov and just see what do they say about following canned spam as a sender of email message because
ftc.gov.
yeah, that ftc.gov, because that really is the expectation. I think the one thing that I think we can all agree is individuals don't necessarily care. Let's be cynical. They don't care if the message is from a nonprofit or a for profit these days. They don't always distinguish that. So you want to make sure you've got your legal wrapped up, but individuals have an expectation that when you outreach to them, you're going to do it in a manner that, let's say, a commercial brand does it, that you're
Mm.
respectful, that you're giving them useful information. And that's where I know that charities try to favor that and try to do best practices.
Thank you for that information. Now, you're also an adjunct lecturer at Georgetown University, correct?
Yes.
Now, from what I understand, your focus is a graduate level course on marketing, advertising, and communication ethics. Where does the foundation for a nonprofit's leader's ethical framework really start?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. So the foundation, this particular coursework involves, as you're saying, ethics. So ethics is beyond just what's legal, just beyond that first step of what is legal. Because as you know, David, what is legal is usually hammered out on Capitol Hill or in the States. What is ethical is much harder sometimes to grasp. It's a grayer zone. There's not always a right and a wrong.
There's
Sometimes
some
it's a gut
EQ
feeling.
involved.
Yeah. So, what we try to do with the students is really frame out what is your moral compass? What do you think about from a moral perspective? And usually it frames out in a couple of ways. One is the golden rule. Whether you take any religion, you take perhaps any philosopher, and you can take it back to that golden rule that is, do unto others as you want done unto you. You don't go out and do something to others that you wouldn't have them do to you. And that's kind of a good starting point. And from what I found over the years teaching students, is they can all relate to that. It has to be relatable. And it can't just be this kind of relativism that maybe we fall into sometimes, where just because it's good in one country or in one neighborhood, we should do that. We have to dig a little deeper and find out what is the moral compass. So maybe you, David, come from the perspective of utilitarianism, where you're trying to help the most people. Or perhaps you have more of a justice perspective, where you in your heart feel like you want to right some wrongs. It doesn't mean that anyone is wrong, but you really need to define what is the moral compass. Where are you coming from in order to resolve a particular ethical dilemma? And there are ethical dilemmas every day for nonprofit leaders, especially if you're going out with messages that might be tough to hear. You have to wrestle with that. How do you present that ethical argument to give, to donate? What is the ethicality? So, yeah, there are a lot of issues for nonprofits, but I would start with that analysis of the golden rule. And then also stakeholder analysis can apply as well. Who are
Absolutely.
your stakeholders? Mhm.
We talked about the future and what might be coming around the corner. Uh, and you already gave us a little bit of a glimpse of that, but I want to head back that direction. Donor acquisition strategies are becoming so much more tech driven and sophisticated. What should we be aware of as nonprofit leaders as we look into the next few years?
Yes. So donor acquisition, you always have to do it. Okay. I have
Yeah,
heard from some
my
very
lifeblood.
large reputable organizations that were like, you know what, we're not going to do acquisition anymore. And we were all like, what? Are you kidding? You're not doing acquisition? Are you kidding me? Because it's the future. It's your future donor pool. So if you go to your board of directors and they're like, hey, we need to trim some costs here, don't trim out the acquisition. I'll just say that because I know that that's very right. That's something that boards are like, oh, what is this acquisition? We don't need that. We need to focus on our current donors. No, you need to acquire. So certainly there are a couple of areas that I know nonprofits are focused on, despite the pandemic. Face to face, right? Face to face fundraising is something to look at. It's personal. You can do it in a safe manner, and a lot of organizations are looking at face-to-face fundraising as one way to outreach to new individuals. At the street level, local, you can imagine local is where it's at. The other one, if you're just talking about the screens, whether it's your Apple device or, of course, your online all the time, is retargeting. So you have to make sure you're doing this in a sensitive manner and opting people out if they don't want it to occur. But David, so you're visiting a site to maybe give to one organization, and maybe you decide not to give at that moment. Perhaps the organization shows up later when you're on another web page to remind you, hey, David, don't forget about us. Perhaps you'd like to give at this moment. Maybe that moment wasn't right earlier. So I would say those are two areas, is face-to-face and retargeting, to build up, that relationship. But you can never forget that you're outreaching to a human being. So many of these tech companies and this tech talk removes that and talks about algorithms and talks about sort of the tech side of this, the math formula, taking a look at personas and creating kind of these structures to outreach and looking at what the results are. But we can never forget that we're always talking to a human being at a very sensitive time as nonprofits about sensitive topics. And we want to do this in the proper manner, and we want to acquire them for their lifetime value. It's not just a one-off. So using these technologies in a humane way, meaning we really know that individual, we really steward that individual throughout their lifetime of giving, throughout all of those methods, is so incredibly important and valuable. It's not just acquisition. It's acquiring the right donor at the right time for the right mission that really binds them to your organization, hopefully for their lifetime.
In the book, Demystifying Fundraising Funnels, I talk about the importance of understanding that if you're going to say the word money, it's a pain point to whoever you're saying it to. And you have to understand that there has to be a reason beyond just a good story for that person to really feel connected, especially today. Trust has gone way down when it comes to the ask because of all the digital marketing, the constant. I literally, without even trying, I get about 9 to 10 spam calls every afternoon on my phone. You block them, they come back again, and they're all trying to say the same thing. And it's always a false narrative to what they really want as a rule. And there becomes this cynicism as a society. And when you as a nonprofit are built on reputation, you still got to fight through that same cynicism. So what you're saying is absolutely spot on. Yes, we need digital marketing. Yes, it brings awareness. Yes, but if we're marketing to people we already have relationships to, we already broken through that wall of distrust, it makes a big deal. A big deal.
Absolutely. And I do want to add, if I could, David, that we want to make sure that we're not forgetting the offline methodologies, especially postal mail
Is
is
it coming back?
incredibly potent for acquisition. So we just had our fundraising conference for the Nonprofit Federation in Washington, and there were a lot of nonprofit executives there that were talking about, they're doing everything on digital. They're looking at that. Absolutely, everyone should do that, but they're also running into what they call digital clutter. And they're not finding that it's easy, as you're saying, to break through. Like you're saying, there's a lot of cynicism. Oh, it's another robocall, or oh, it's another ad. So how do they break through the digital clutter? And of course, they're saying postal. Don't forget about that. It really is a champion for nonprofit organizations, especially with acquisition. They're getting really good results, likely because people open that mail. They have like that physical connection. They have a point of contact. They have the physical mail piece, which again goes back to our own humanity, where we want to touch and see and feel things. We don't necessarily just want to see things on a screen. So getting through that digital clutter, there's a real art form to that. But also don't forget about the postal channel, as I mentioned, the face-to-face, the other marketing channels that are out there that are doing well and are supporting these organizations, especially during this pandemic, hopefully this recovery right now.
I have to say you're absolutely right. The thought that I'm going to have to stop typing as much and actually doing handwriting, I have to work these muscles out a little bit, get them back in shape, maybe get my cursive looking a little cleaner. I know my mother, who actually lives with us now. She is pushing 90 years of age, and she lives with Michelle and I. She has been a very generous person her whole life, and therefore she gets so much, even physical mail. I mean, her inbox, at 90 years of age, she spends every day going through her email. But I pick up her mail for her. And I kid you not, just about 6, 7 weeks ago, we're cracking up because I do it every day. And one day she got 58 pieces of mail. And this is what she did. It was from all types of people. Majority it was political. And she sat there and she just threw it all away. But as soon as she saw one that had handwriting on it, like it had something that it felt real, it became special to her. And she put that aside and tossed it. And at the end, she had these 3 letters, 2 of them from nonprofits that were asking for money and one from a friend. But she sat there and she opened them and she read
Oh,
them and she read them several times. It was a joy for her.
that's phenomenal. That's absolutely phenomenal because you know how much time and effort these nonprofits are spending to get the message right to donors like your mother. It's incredible the generosity that these donors have for beloved organizations, and having that mail piece can be so important to them to know that the organization is even still there, with the pandemic. Gosh, is that organization still doing well? And how is it really helping during the pandemic? Or what might be happening if they're not helping on the pandemic, but they have other missions? I think you mentioned performing arts. I just have to say, I really feel for the performing arts who had to set things aside, but they've really been reinventing themselves with some of the digital performing arts. It's incredible. And hopefully they can come back soon and entertain us, but that's vitally important as well. So there are a lot of missions that may not be getting as much attention right now. So trying to break through that clutter, trying to go out to your donors, maybe your past lists is so important now. Just take a look at who might be missing, not just looking at that sort of that bright shiny object that happens with digital. I mean, digital is incredible and incredibly powerful, but just because it's over, like, wow, this is the next thing, doesn't mean it's going to bring the results that you're used to with your tried and true marketing methods.
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
reason that is all working. You're really doing a good job.
I
Yeah.
found out um, very specifically, digital marketing can be a real multiplier, but only if you already got momentum, only if you already have conversations going. It becomes the something that really allows one to become four, but you already have to have that one, that thing going. A part of the world that you have spent some time in, Stephen Baldwin, who is the executive director of the Washington Chorus, has a beautiful Christmas presentation at the Kennedy Center. He was my guest just last week, and they have done something remarkable. One of the reasons I was talking to him, and that is they have been able to take a year where they were shut down because they are a performance-based nonprofit sector,
Mhm.
right? They're doing performances, and it's in front of. I said, how did you even make so much more money in donations this last year than the year before? And he goes, we sat down and figured how can we bring what we do to the masses versus to just those that can attend at Kennedy Center, right? Instead of just the people that were part of the membership, we took it across borders. We took it outside of DC. We took it across through the states by using all the social media we could. So instead of taking all of our time and putting together the performance at the Kennedy Center, we took all that time to find how can we communicate our value to everybody that can watch and listen to us. And as a result, the Washington Chorus, without being able to do a single public event, grew last year. And I just think that's remarkable.
It's really remarkable, and it really shows you the value of social media. I know there's a lot of pitfalls and a lot of negatives about social media, but just imagine if we didn't have that during this pandemic. And it really has been incredible for nonprofit organizations to share their messages,
Yeah.
and to get more supporters for the long term, not just for this past year. We heard a lot of that, again, during last week's conference about how they did during the pandemic. People were very generous. And now everyone is wondering, well, what's going to happen now in 22 and 23 to get to these results? And how do you actually plan your budget? Because it was such an anomaly, the giving during the pandemic. People were so generous to beloved charities, and they really were. It
Beautiful.
was quite amazing.
Yeah. Talk to me about the ANA, the Association of National Advertisers, which is who you are. Those are the people you're fighting with to help all of us nonprofits and advertisers out there. Um, what is the ANA's impact directly on the nonprofit sector?
Yeah, absolutely. So the ANA is the largest trade association for advertising and marketing. So it really focuses as an organization on growth. The Nonprofit Federation was acquired in 2018. ANA already had many nonprofit organizations within its membership that were learning all about marketing, best practices, and the like. We brought in the fundraising side of the equation. So we're able to connect the dots between what commercial brands are doing that's incredibly successful and what nonprofits are doing that is also incredibly successful. I feel like there's a really nice marriage between commercial side and nonprofit side where commercial folks, we're seeing this, they're talking about having an impact, social impact, old corporate and social responsibility, and working with nonprofits. Whereas nonprofits are saying, look, we would like to partner with brands. We would like to learn from very large brands what works, what doesn't work. So they themselves don't have to go out there and maybe spend their resources, but you look to the brands to see what is on the leading edge right now to do acquisition, what's really working with data. And then also with our Washington office, we work very well together because certainly when things hurt nonprofit folks, it hurts commercial brands as well in terms of privacy. So we work together on legislative issues. So I would say the ANA really marries the nonprofit side together with the brands for their growth and for future impact, and to learn best practices on how to actually sustain the nonprofit work over time. There's amazing work underway right now on the tech side with brands that nonprofits can learn from through the ANA.
Now, in just 3 weeks in Orlando, ANA is going to be doing their big, actually international media conference. It's big. It's one of the biggest things that happens in the region. I checked. I was surprised because you do a lot of public speaking. You speak at conferences on an annual basis. I looked. I couldn't find you on the roster of speakers this year. Oh, I should follow it up with, I wasn't invited either, and we both need to work on that for next year.
You got it, maybe next year. Yeah, no,
So,
yeah, go ahead.
so I was just gonna say, if you were gonna be speaking there this year, and your subject, of course, being the area of ethics and looking at nonprofits. I know ANA it really is focusing much broad scope than just the nonprofit world, but if you're going to do a 3 to 4 minute TED talk and you're saying, okay, David, I'm going to make up for not speaking at ANA conference this year, would you do that for us tonight for this podcast?
Yeah, sure, why not?
Oh, gosh, you're a good sport. Throw that at you. All right, there's your fastball. Can you give us a 2 to 3 minute podcast TED talk about how and the direction we're going as nonprofits over the next couple years?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess my TED Talk would be about, as you mentioned earlier, about building trust as nonprofit organizations. I would say that the nonprofit community is fearless and dedicated, but we often don't really showcase what we're doing in terms of competency. So I know that nonprofit fundraising and marketing professionals focus in on promoting and making it really amazing to give and learning about nonprofit organizations. But where nonprofits have to perhaps lean in a little bit more is around their competency. So and presenter come in and tell us that unfortunately nonprofits are not as trusted as they used to be. And that was pretty surprising to me, being someone who believes and trusts nonprofit organizations. Why did it, maybe go down just a little bit? And the presenter really talked about what's going on is nonprofits are very good at talking about fundraising and their impact, but are they actually doing a review of their competency? So brands, for example, are seen as more competent than charities, let's say to fulfill a mission like providing clean water or perhaps fulfilling a climate change goal or priority because they've got the resources, they've got the methods, they're very large. Nonprofits do a great job of talking about needs, but are they viewed the same as actually competently providing that to an impoverished community? And I know that's kind of hard to hear, but that's perhaps where the public sees it is, the for-profit realm right now is viewed as more competent than the NGO realm in terms of providing the services. So I think that's one area for us to focus on. So nonprofit fundraisers have to talk about the mission, have to get out there and get donations in, but you also have to think about what's really happening with your impact. Is it really happening? What's really happening with your board of directors? Who's really there? Who's really, the ambassador for your nonprofit? Are you really meeting that goal? Or are you just talking about meeting that goal? That may not be enough now. So I know it's hard to hear for nonprofits who are always like, we're doing everything we can possibly do, but you're going to have to do even more to really meet that trust metric
Mm.
that has been developed by the for-profits, by the tech companies. You can see the amazing work that's happening right now, whether it's Google or some of these large platforms. Well, can nonprofits possibly measure up to that? And there are some that can, but most we know they can't. I mean, you're doing work right now that is very difficult. So showcasing that difficult work is something that you really should strive for and not hide it, not maybe talk about past projects, but talk about what you're doing now and how do you meet that goal? How do you meet that trust so that you can really have that supporter base for the future? So David, I don't know if that's enough, but
That was really good. I'll give you an applause. There you go.
okay, thank you. Thank you
Yes.
very much.
Excellent. What is the
There's a lot.
best way somebody can connect with the ANA if they're looking to, we need to know more about this. How can they best connect?
Yeah, so we've got a main webpage, ana.net, that talks about the different areas of what we do. So you can just go to our webpage. You can always find nonprofit at nonprofitfederation.org. And we hope that you will connect with us so that you can learn about the latest and the greatest with fundraising and marketing best practices and really how to advance your mission. And we would like to know more about what nonprofits are doing. So we really want to showcase your brand and your value back to the public and to other brands. So we're happy to connect at any time.
Absolutely. We end every single nonprofit podcast with a shout out to nonprofits that are doing a really good job. And we try to pick one per podcast. And so I'm going to go ahead and go first. And when I'm done, I'm going to throw it at you and you give a shout out to a nonprofit that you love. Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
So I'd like to, I always like to go to Charity Navigator before I say anything on a podcast about a shout out for a nonprofit. And they have a list 10 charities with the most consecutive 4-star ratings. 4 stars for them is the best you can do, exceptional. And so over the next several podcasts, I'm going to start at number 10 and work our way down to number 1. Number 10 is America's Kidney Foundation. So I'm going to just move past that real quick. It's medical. I'm going to move to number 9. And number 9 is the Robin Hood Foundation. For 19 years in a row, they have been given the highest rating available for the donors so they can give with confidence by Charity Navigator. This is remarkable. 19 years in a row, they have been right there at the you can't score them above that ceiling that they're hit. And I want to tell you guys that Robin Hood, you're doing an amazing job of running your nonprofits. So what is Robin Hood? Robin Hood is fighting poverty in New York City. And for over 30 years, they have been providing not just the tools, but also the education, the support systems, and raising the next generation out of poverty and into being able to build their lives. And so, guys at Robin Hood, you're doing an amazing job. Shout out from us here, and thank you for what you're doing. Senny, it's your turn.
Okay. Well, David, hopefully you won't get mad at me, but I can say, from the Nonprofit Federation side, we are a little bit at arm's length with various charity watchdogs.
Oh, makes sense.
We
Yes.
always say that you should go to the charity of your choice yourself before you go to one of these watchdogs, because they have their pitfalls. We can always talk about this at another time. But right now, I would say I actually have two, if that's not too much trouble for you.
Break the rules. Go for it.
I'm going to break the rules. So the first one, of course, is Feeding America, simply because they really leaned in during this pandemic. And from a marketing and fundraising perspective, they did amazing work in terms of the fundamentals for marketing and fundraising. Now, we have hundreds of organizations as members of ours, so I don't want to pick and choose, but I just thought they did a spectacular job in terms of staying engaged with their donors and in terms of their fundraising methods throughout all of the different marketing and fundraising channels. So if you're out there doing fundraising, that's one organization to really take a close look at. They do incredible work during these pandemic times and for so many decades. So my applause goes to them. The other one that I hadn't really focused in on, but we were just really so happy to honor their fundraiser, Mike Chelik, over at Boys Town in Omaha, Nebraska.
I love
I
Boys Town.
I could not believe how much work they've done and their history and their vision and their mission for the youth. And it really literally is a town that has all sorts of, it's got a school, hospital, post office. It's incredible. And the work that they do and the passion for their mission, I really give them massive applause. And I know Mike Veselak, he won just this last week the Max Hart Award for his fundraising endeavors. So congratulations to Mike and congratulations to Boys Town. It's an incredible organization. So those are my top, my two, but we have hundreds as members. So I don't want to say we don't have, we love them all.
Senny, it has been a delight to have you on our podcast. Thank you so much.
We are always delighted to speak with folks like yourself. And thank you so much for giving me a chance to talk about the work that we do.
Awesome. And for you doing the amazing work you do at your communities, thank you so much. We need nonprofits like you. We need founders like you. We need volunteers like you coming and helping your society, your community, your neighborhoods rise up. And you are the best of us. And you may not hear that. You may even go, no, I'm not. But the truth is, you are. And we thank you for what you're doing. And until we speak again in a few days, you have an amazing day. Bye now.